The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as General Heinrich Müller strode purposefully toward the administrative building. His polished boots clicked against the concrete with the precision of a metronome, each step echoing his authority throughout the base. The year was 1943, and the war had hardened men's hearts and sharpened their resolve for what they believed was right. Anna Kellner had been working as a secretary in the German military office for nearly 2 years. At 26, she possessed a quiet strength that her colleagues often mistook for meekness. Her auburn hair was always neatly pinned back, and her brown eyes held a depth that spoke of intelligence carefully concealed behind a facade of obedience. She had learned early in her employment that survival meant blending into the background, completing her duties without drawing attention to herself. The morning had started like any other. Anna arrived at precisely 7:30, unlocked her desk, and began organizing the day's correspondence. The office bustled with activity as junior officers shuffled papers and barked orders at subordinates. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the tension that came with wartime bureaucracy. General Müller was known throughout the region as a man who demanded absolute respect and unwavering loyalty. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and stories of his swift punishment for insubordination had become legendary among the ranks. He was a tall man with steely gray eyes and a mustache that he kept meticulously groomed. His uniform bore numerous decorations, each one a testament to his dedication to the cause he served. As Anna sorted through a stack of requisition forms, she noticed unusual movement outside her window. A convoy of trucks had arrived, and soldiers were unloading what appeared to be civilians. Men, women, and children stood huddled together, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Their clothes were wrinkled and dirty, suggesting they'd been traveling for some time under difficult conditions. The sight made Anna's stomach turn. She had heard whispers around the office about special operations and relocations, but witnessing it firsthand brought a crushing reality to what had previously been mere rumors. She watched as families were separated, children crying as they reached for parents who were being led in different directions. Colonel Weber, the office supervisor, entered the room and called for attention. His voice cut through the morning chatter like a knife. Every employee immediately stopped their work and stood at attention. Anna rose from her chair, her heart pounding as she sensed something significant was about to occur. General Müller will be conducting an inspection of our department this morning, Weber announced, his voice carrying the weight of expectation. I expect everyone to demonstrate the highest level of respect and military courtesy. When the general enters, you will stand, salute, and remain at attention until dismissed. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Anna felt her palms grow damp as she thought about the scene unfolding outside. The image of those frightened families burned in her mind, and she struggled to reconcile the efficiency of her workplace with the human suffering she had just witnessed. Minutes passed like hours as they waited. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the murmur of voices in the hallway. Anna could hear General Müller's distinctive laugh, a sound that seemed incongruous with the gravity of what was happening just beyond the building's walls. The door swung open, and General Müller entered with his usual commanding presence. He was flanked by 2 junior officers who followed a respectful distance behind. His eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to finding fault. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying across the room with military authority. The response came in unison from every person present except one. Anna remained seated at her desk, her hands folded in her lap. She did not stand. She did not salute. She simply looked directly at the general with a steady gaze that surprised even herself with its calmness. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the room seemed to hold their breath as they realized what was happening. Colonel Weber's face turned pale, and he took a half-step forward as if to intervene, but stopped himself when he saw the general's expression. General Müller's eyebrows rose slightly, and a thin smile played at the corners of his mouth. He was clearly intrigued by this unprecedented act of defiance. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered such bold insubordination, especially not from a civilian employee. "Miss Kellner, is it?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He had made it his business to know the names of everyone under his command, no matter how seemingly insignificant their role. "Yes, sir," Anna replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Perhaps you did not hear the instruction to stand and salute when I entered the room." Anna's response would become the moment that changed everything. She looked directly into his eyes and spoke words that would echo through the halls of that military compound for years to come. "I heard the instruction, General, but I cannot salute a man who separates children from their mothers." The room seemed to freeze in time. The only sound was the distant rumble of the trucks outside and the barely audible breathing of the terrified office workers who witnessed this confrontation. General Muller's expression shifted from amusement to something far more dangerous. His hands, which had been clasped behind his back, slowly moved to his sides. The junior officers behind him exchanged nervous glances, uncertain how to respond to such an unprecedented situation. "I see," he said finally, his voice carrying a deadly calm. "And what exactly gives you the authority to judge my actions, Miss Kellner?" Anna felt the weight of every eye in the room upon her. She knew that her next words could very well determine not only her fate, but potentially the fate of others. Yet something deep within her refused to allow this moment to pass without speaking the truth that had been burning in her chest since she witnessed the scene outside. Her response would not only shock the general, but would reveal a connection that none of them could have anticipated, setting in motion a series of events that would test the limits of conscience, courage, and the complex nature of human relationships during one of history's darkest periods. Anna drew a deep breath, knowing that the next words she spoke would irrevocably change the course of her life. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force, but she found strength in the memory of her father's teachings about moral courage. "My authority comes from the memory of Wilhelm Kellner," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "My father, who served under you in the Great War and saved your life at Verdun." The effect of her words was immediate and profound. General Muller's face went completely white, as if he had seen a ghost. His carefully maintained military composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something vulnerable beneath the hardened exterior. The junior officers behind him noticed the change, but could not understand its significance. Colonel Weber looked completely bewildered. He had known Anna for 2 years, but she had never mentioned her father's military service or any connection to General Muller. The other office workers remained frozen in place, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond a simple case of insubordination. General Muller's mind raced back 25 years to the muddy trenches of France. He remembered Wilhelm Kellner vividly, a young sergeant with kind eyes and an infectious laugh who had somehow maintained his humanity despite the horror surrounding them. Wilhelm had been beloved by his men, always sharing his rations and volunteering for the most dangerous missions to spare others. The memory that Anna had invoked was burned into Muller's consciousness. It was October 1918, during the final German offensive. Muller, then a young lieutenant, had been caught in no man's land during an artillery barrage. Shrapnel had torn through his leg, and he lay bleeding in a shell crater, certain he would die. Through the smoke and chaos, Wilhelm Kellner had crawled across 50 meters of open ground under heavy fire to reach him. "You're going to be fine, sir," Wilhelm had said, his voice calm despite the bullets whining overhead. "I've got you." He had carried Muller back to their lines on his back, an act of heroism that had saved Muller's life and earned Wilhelm a commendation for bravery. But there was more to their relationship than that single act of heroism. During the long months in the trenches, Wilhelm had become something of a moral compass for the young officer. He had a way of seeing the humanity in their enemies and, would often speak about the wives and children that the soldiers on both sides had left behind. War makes monsters of good men, Wilhelm had once told Muller during a quiet moment between battles. The real victory is keeping our souls intact. These words had haunted Muller throughout his career, though he had gradually learned to silence their voice as he climbed the ranks of military hierarchy. Now, standing in this office 25 years later, those words echoed in his mind with devastating clarity. He looked at Anna with new eyes, seeing in her features the unmistakable resemblance to the man who had saved his life. The same steady gaze, the same quiet strength, the same moral conviction that had defined her father. "Wilhelm Kellner was your father?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. His voice had lost its commanding edge and carried instead a note of genuine emotion. "Yes," Anna replied. "He died of his wounds 3 weeks after the armistice was signed. But before he died, he spoke of you often. He said you were a good man who had been changed by war, but that deep down you still remembered what it meant to be human." The words hit General Muller like physical blows. He remembered visiting Wilhelm in the military hospital, seeing him weakened by infection from wounds received during another rescue mission. Wilhelm had smiled when he saw Muller approach his bedside, despite his obvious pain. "Heinrich," Wilhelm had said, using Muller's first name as he often did when they were alone. "Promise me something. When this war is over, remember that every uniform hides a beating heart. Don't let the machine turn you into something you're not." Muller had made that promise, though he had broken it countless times in the years that followed. Each promotion, each new assignment, each difficult order had chipped away at the idealistic young Lieutenant Wilhelm had saved. The man he had become was barely recognizable as the person Wilhelm Kellner had believed him to be. The silence in the room stretched on as General Muller struggled with emotions he had buried for decades. The junior officers shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether they should intervene or simply wait for orders. Colonel Weber cleared his throat nervously, clearly wanting to defuse the situation, but unsure how to proceed. Anna watched the general's internal struggle with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She had gambled everything on the belief that some trace of the man her father had described still existed beneath the hardened military exterior. Her father had always spoken of people's capacity for redemption, but she was about to learn whether that faith had been misplaced. "Miss Kellner," General Muller finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "step outside with me. We need to speak privately." Colonel Weber started to object, but a sharp look from the general silenced him. Anna rose from her desk and followed Muller toward the door, acutely aware that her colleagues were watching her with expressions ranging from admiration to terror. As they stepped into the corridor, Anna could hear the distant sounds of the convoy operations continuing outside. The reminder of what was happening strengthened her resolve, even as she faced an uncertain future. General Muller walked slowly, his usual military bearing replaced by something that seemed almost like exhaustion. When they reached a small alcove away from prying ears, he stopped and turned to face her. "Your father," he began, then paused, struggling with words that seemed too large for his throat. "Wilhelm saved more than my life that day in France. For a long time, he saved my soul as well." Anna waited, sensing that he needed to find his own way to whatever he was trying to say. "But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of his teachings. I convinced myself that duty required me to set aside conscience, that the greater good sometimes demanded terrible choices." He looked directly at her, and she saw pain in his eyes that years of military discipline could not hide. "Your father would be ashamed of what I've become." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of years of compromised choices and abandoned principles. Anna realized she was witnessing something extraordinary, the moment when a powerful man confronted the distance between who he was and who he had once hoped to be. But their conversation was about to be interrupted by an event that would test both of their convictions and force them to make choices that would define the rest of their lives. Before Anna could respond to General Muller's painful admission, the sound of shouting erupted from the courtyard below. Through the window, they could see a commotion near one of the transport trucks. A young mother was fighting desperately to reach her child, who had been placed in a different vehicle. Her screams pierced the morning air with a raw anguish that made both Anna and the general freeze. "Please," the woman cried in accented German. "He's only 4 years old. He needs his medicine. Please don't separate us." 2 soldiers were restraining the woman, while a third tried to calm the crying child. The scene was chaotic and heartbreaking, a perfect illustration of the human cost of the policies that General Muller had helped implement. Anna watched the general's face as he observed the scene below. She could see the internal battle playing out in his expressions, the conflict between his military training and the conscience that her father's memory had awakened. His hands gripped the windowsill until his knuckles turned white. "That could have been my own son," he whispered, almost to himself. "If circumstances had been different, if fate had dealt a different hand." Anna seized the moment. "It's not too late, General. My father always said that a man's character isn't defined by his past mistakes, but by what he chooses to do when he finally sees clearly." The sound of footsteps approaching interrupted their conversation. Captain Richter, one of Muller's most ambitious subordinates, appeared at the end of the corridor. He had been looking for the general and seemed puzzled to find him in deep conversation with a civilian secretary. "General Muller, sir," Captain Richter said, snapping to attention. "Colonel Brennan is requesting your immediate presence in the operations room. The transport schedule needs your approval." The mention of the transport schedule sent a chill through Anna. She knew that once those trucks left the compound, the families would be scattered to camps across the region, likely never to be reunited. The window for intervention was rapidly closing. General Muller straightened, and, for a moment, Anna feared that the spell had been broken, that he would retreat back into his military persona and proceed with business as usual. But instead, he turned to Captain Richter with an expression of newfound determination. "Captain, I want you to halt all transport operations immediately," he ordered, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. Captain Richter's eyes widened in surprise. "Sir? But the orders came directly from Berlin. The quotas must be met, and we're already behind schedule." "I said halt the operations, Captain. That's a direct order." "But, sir, with all due respect, Colonel Brennan will want to know the reason for the delay. The paperwork has already been processed, and the manifests have been sent." General Muller walked closer to the captain, his bearing once again that of a commanding officer, but now driven by a different kind of purpose. "Tell Colonel Brennan that I am conducting a review of the transport procedures to ensure they meet proper military standards. All families are to be kept together during this review process." Captain Richter looked confused, but knew better than to question a direct order from a general. "Yes, sir. I'll relay your instructions immediately." As the captain hurried away, Anna felt a surge of hope mixed with amazement. The man her father had believed in was still there, buried under years of military indoctrination, but not completely lost. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. General Muller was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the scene below where soldiers were already beginning to respond to the new orders. The shouting had stopped, and the young mother was being allowed to approach her child. "Now I face the consequences of rediscovering my conscience," he said finally. "This will not go unnoticed by my superiors. They will demand explanations that I cannot give without risking court-martial." Anna understood the magnitude of what he was risking. "My father would say that some things are worth the risk. Your father was a wise man, and a brave one." He turned to face her fully. "But I need more than courage now. I need a plan that can save as many lives as possible while buying time to find a permanent solution." Over the next hour, an unlikely partnership formed between the general and the secretary. Anna's knowledge of the administrative processes, combined with Muller's military authority, created opportunities that neither could have achieved alone. Anna suggested that the delay could be justified by claims of incomplete medical examinations, missing documentation, or concerns about transportation safety. These bureaucratic obstacles could potentially buy weeks of time while they worked on a longer-term solution. General Muller's mind began working tactically, just as it had during his military campaigns, but now with an entirely different objective. He realized that his position gave him access to transportation resources, communication networks, and official documentation that could be used to help rather than harm. There are sympathetic contacts in Switzerland, he told Anna quietly. People who have been helping refugees cross the border. If we could modify the transport routes, create believable diversions. The Red Cross has been asking for permission to inspect the facilities, Anna added. If we could delay long enough for them to arrive, they might be able to intervene officially. They spent the next several hours developing a complex plan that would require precise timing and considerable risk. Anna would use her access to the communication systems to send coded messages to resistance contacts, while General Muller would manipulate the military bureaucracy to create legitimate reasons for delays and route changes. But their planning was interrupted by news that would force them to accelerate their timeline dramatically. Colonel Brennan had become suspicious of the delays and had contacted headquarters in Berlin. A special investigator was being sent to review the situation, and he was expected to arrive within 48 hours. Once the investigator arrives, any further delays will be impossible to justify, General Muller explained grimly. We'll have one chance to execute whatever plan we devise. Anna felt the weight of hundreds of lives pressing down on her shoulders. Then we'll have to make it count. That evening, as Anna walked home through the darkened streets, she carried with her a burden she had never imagined. In her purse were carefully coded messages that needed to reach resistance contacts by morning. In her mind were the faces of the families whose lives hung in the balance. She thought about her father and wondered if he could have foreseen that his words to a young officer in a French trench would someday echo through his daughter's voice in a moment of moral crisis. The connection between past and present seemed almost mystical, as if Wilhelm Kellner's spirit was somehow guiding events from beyond the grave. But Anna also understood that good intentions and moral courage would not be enough. The next 24 hours would require practical skills, careful coordination, and a considerable amount of luck. The stakes could not be higher, and failure would mean not only the destruction of innocent families, but likely the end of both her own life and that of the general who had chosen to risk everything on the memory of her father's faith in human goodness. As she prepared for what might be the most important day of her life, Anna realized that she was about to discover whether her father's beliefs about redemption and moral courage could survive in a world that seemed designed to destroy them. The next morning arrived with an autumn chill that seemed to match the tension gripping the military compound. Anna arrived at work earlier than usual, her heart pounding as she carried out the first steps of their desperate plan. The coded messages had been delivered during the night, and now everything depended on precise timing and the cooperation of people she had never met but had to trust completely. General Muller had spent the sleepless night reviewing transportation manifests and communication protocols, identifying exactly where and how they could create the necessary diversions. His plan was audacious and would require him to abuse his authority in ways that could result in execution if discovered, but the memory of Wilhelm Kellner and the sight of that desperate mother had crystallized his resolve. The first phase began at 8 o'clock when Anna submitted a request for emergency medical evaluation of several detainees, claiming that symptoms of a contagious illness had been observed. This bought them several hours while a medical officer was summoned from a neighboring base. The doctor, unknowingly playing his part in their scheme, would indeed find several cases requiring immediate attention, symptoms that Anna had carefully orchestrated through contacts among the prisoners. While the medical evaluation proceeded, General Muller called a meeting with his transport commanders. He presented them with new orders that appeared to come from Berlin, directing a change in the route that would take the convoys through a mountain pass instead of the usual direct highway. The justification was increased partisan activity along the main road, requiring a more secure but longer alternative route. The new route will add approximately 6 hours to the journey, he explained to his officers, his voice carrying no hint of the deception involved. We'll need to make overnight stops at designated waypoints, to ensure the safety of the transport. Captain Richter raised a concern about fuel consumption and vehicle maintenance, but General Mueller dismissed these objections with military efficiency. These orders come from the highest level, Captain. Our job is to implement them, not question the strategic thinking behind them. The waypoint that Mueller had designated was a small village near the Swiss border where resistance contacts had been preparing for their arrival. The plan called for the convoys to stop there for routine maintenance and security checks that would actually provide an opportunity for families to escape across the nearby border. But the plan required perfect coordination with people operating in complete secrecy, and Anna knew that a single miscommunication could doom them all. She spent the morning monitoring radio communications and relay messages, using her position as secretary to access information networks that normally would have been beyond her reach. At 11 o'clock, disturbing news arrived that threatened to unravel everything. The special investigator from Berlin had departed earlier than expected and would arrive by afternoon rather than the following day. Colonel Brennan was already asking pointed questions about the delays and had begun reviewing transport documentation with suspicious scrutiny. Anna immediately passed this information to General Mueller through a coded note delivered by a junior clerk. His response came back within minutes. Execute immediately. No choice. The acceleration of their timeline meant that several crucial elements of their plan were not yet in place. The resistance contacts near the Swiss border had been expecting the convoys to arrive the following evening, not that afternoon. The medical evaluations were incomplete, and some of the families were still being processed through bureaucratic procedures that would normally take hours. General Mueller made the decision to bypass standard protocols entirely. He issued emergency orders directing that all detainees be loaded immediately into transport vehicles for urgent relocation due to security threats. To his subordinates, this appeared to be a response to the accelerated timeline from Berlin. In reality, it was a desperate attempt to move the families out of the compound before the investigator arrived. Anna watched from her office window as the loading process began. Families were being reunited and placed together in the same vehicles, a small mercy that would not have occurred under normal procedures. The young mother she had seen the day before was holding her 4-year-old son tightly, unaware that their separation had been prevented by the intervention of people they would never know. But as the convoys prepared to depart, a new crisis emerged. Captain Richter had been reviewing the routing orders and had discovered discrepancies in the paperwork. The authorization codes did not match the standard format used by Berlin headquarters, and he was beginning to suspect that something was wrong. Richter approached Colonel Brennan with his concerns just as the first trucks were starting their engines. "Sir, I believe we should delay departure until we can verify these orders. Something doesn't seem right about the routing instructions." Anna overheard this conversation from her desk and immediately understood that their entire plan was about to collapse. Without hesitation, she stood up and walked directly to where the two officers were talking. "Excuse me, Colonel Brennan," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have an urgent message from General Mueller requesting your immediate presence in his office regarding the investigator's arrival." It was a complete fabrication, but it served to separate the two men and by precious minutes. As Colonel Brennan hurried away, Anna found herself alone with Captain Richter, who was still holding the suspicious paperwork. "Captain," she said quietly, "there are some things happening here that are bigger than either of us understands. But I can tell you that innocent children are going to die if those trucks don't leave in the next 10 minutes. Richter looked at her with surprise and growing suspicion. "What are you talking about? What do you know about these operations?" Anna made a decision that would either save lives or cost her everything. "I know that sometimes following orders isn't the same as doing what's right. And I know that you have a daughter about the same age as some of those children on the trucks." The mention of his daughter hit Richter like a physical blow. He did indeed have a young child at home, and Anna's words forced him to confront the human reality of what was happening. He looked out the window at the loaded trucks, seeing for the first time the faces of the families rather than just the logistics of the operation. For a long moment, Captain Richter stood frozen, holding the papers that could stop the convoys. Anna watched his face, seeing the same internal struggle that had played out in General Muller's expression the day before. She realized she was witnessing another moment of moral awakening, another conscience being tested by circumstances it had never expected to face. Finally, Richter walked to a nearby wastebasket and deliberately tore the suspicious paperwork into small pieces. "I believe there must have been some error in the documentation," he said quietly. "The orders appear to be in proper form, after all." Anna felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly buckled her knees. But there was no time for gratitude or celebration. The trucks were already moving toward the compound gates, and their success would depend on events now beyond anyone's control. As the convoy disappeared down the road toward the mountains and the Swiss border, Anna and Captain Richter stood together in silence, both understanding that they had just participated in something that would change them forever. They had no way of knowing whether the families would reach safety, whether the resistance contacts would be in position, or whether their own actions would be discovered. What they did know was that when faced with a choice between duty and conscience, they had chosen to listen to the voice that Wilhelm Kellner had nurtured in a young officer 25 years ago in a French trench. The ripples of that choice would determine not only the fate of the families in those trucks, but the ultimate destiny of everyone who had participated in this act of rebellion against an evil system. The most dangerous part of their plan was still ahead, and none of them knew whether they would survive to see its conclusion. The special investigator from Berlin arrived at precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just hours after the last transport truck had disappeared around the mountain curve. SS Oberfuhrer Klaus Steinberg was a thin, severe man with pale eyes that seemed to catalog every detail for future reference. His reputation for uncovering irregularities and punishing those responsible had preceded him, creating an atmosphere of nervous tension throughout the compound. Anna remained at her desk, maintaining the appearance of normal office routine while her heart hammered against her ribs. Every few minutes, she glanced at the clock, calculating how much time had passed since the convoys departed. By her estimates, they should be approaching the first waypoint where resistance contacts would be waiting to guide families toward the Swiss border. General Muller greeted Investigator Steinberg with military formality, showing no outward sign of the monumental deception he had just orchestrated. Years of military discipline served him well as he provided a detailed briefing on the compound's operations, including the transportation schedules that had supposedly been completed according to standard procedures. "I understand there were some delays in yesterday's operations," Steinberg said, his voice carrying an undertone of suspicion. "Berlin has received reports of irregularities that require investigation." "Minor administrative issues," General Muller replied smoothly. "Medical evaluations took longer than anticipated, and we discovered some documentation errors that require correction. Everything has been resolved, and the transports departed on schedule." Steinberg requested to review all transportation records and manifests from the past week. Anna found herself in the impossible position of having to provide documents that would either expose their deception or somehow conceal the evidence of what they had done. She gathered the files with hands that she willed to remain steady, knowing that her father's memory and the lives of dozens of families depended on her ability to maintain the facade. As Steinberg examined the paperwork, Anna noticed that he paused at several entries, his pale eyes narrowing as he studied details that might reveal inconsistencies. The forged authorization codes that had fooled Captain Richter might not pass the scrutiny of someone specifically trained to detect such irregularities. "This routing change," Steinberg said, pointing to the mountain pass direction. "When was this order received from Berlin?" General Muller consulted his notes with practiced calm. "Yesterday morning, approximately 9:15. The order cited increased partisan activity along the primary route and directed the use of secondary roads for security reasons." "Interesting. I have no record of such an order being issued by my department." The statement hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Anna felt the blood drain from her face, but she forced herself to continue organizing files as if nothing unusual had been said. General Muller's expression remained unchanged, though she could see a muscle in his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Perhaps the order originated from a different department, Muller suggested. Security directives sometimes come through military intelligence rather than your office. Steinberg made a note in his folder. We shall see. I'll need to speak with each of your subordinates individually to verify the timeline of events. Over the next 2 hours, Steinberg conducted interviews with every member of the administrative staff. Anna's turn came at 4 o'clock, and she entered the interview room knowing that a single wrong answer could unravel everything they had worked to accomplish. Miss Kellner, Steinberg began, consulting his notes. You handle communication and documentation for this office. Tell me about yesterday's routing change. Anna had prepared for this moment, rehearsing her responses to appear consistent with the story General Muller had established. The order came through normal channels around 9:15 yesterday morning. I processed the paperwork and distributed copies to the relevant departments. And you didn't find anything unusual about the timing or content of this order? No, sir. Security directives are not uncommon, especially with increased partisan activity in the region. Steinberg leaned forward slightly. Miss Kellner, in your opinion, does General Muller ever make decisions that deviate from standard procedures? The question was clearly a trap, designed to elicit either criticism of her superior or an admission that irregular activities had taken place. Anna chose her words carefully, drawing on her father's teachings about the power of simple truth. General Muller is an experienced officer who makes decisions based on military necessity and the safety of personnel under his command. I have never observed him acting contrary to proper military protocol. It was technically true, since saving innocent lives could be considered proper protocol under any moral definition of military duty. Steinberg seemed frustrated by her straightforward responses and dismissed her after several more routine questions. As evening approached, Anna realized that the convoys should now be approaching the Swiss border. She found herself silently praying to her father's memory, hoping that Wilhelm Kellner's spirit might somehow watch over the families they had tried to save. The crisis came at 8 o'clock when a radio message arrived from one of the transport commanders. Anna was still in the office, working late to maintain appearances, when she heard the communication that made her blood freeze. Base Command, this is Transport Unit 7. We have encountered unexpected road conditions and require immediate instructions regarding route alternatives. It was the coded message that meant the resistance contact had successfully intercepted the convoys and families were being evacuated across the border. But to anyone listening who wasn't part of the plan, it sounded like a routine request for guidance about travel difficulties. General Muller responded with apparent military efficiency. Transport 7, proceed to designated secondary waypoint and await further instructions. Maintain communication schedule as established. But Investigator Steinberg had been monitoring the communications, and something about the exchange aroused his suspicions. General, what is this secondary waypoint? I don't see it listed in any of the official routing documentation. Anna held her breath as she waited for Muller's response. She could see him calculating rapidly, trying to devise an explanation that would satisfy the investigator without revealing the truth. The secondary waypoint is a contingency location established for exactly this type of situation, he said finally. When transport units encounter unexpected conditions, they proceed to predetermined safe positions until routes can be verified. And where exactly is this waypoint located? Approximately 15 kilometers south of the primary route, near the village of Bergheim. Anna knew that Bergheim was actually 20 kilometers north of where the convoys really were, but Steinberg had no way to verify the location immediately. The misdirection might buy them a few more hours before the deception was discovered. At 10 o'clock that evening, a final radio message arrived that would determine the success or failure of their desperate plan. The transmission was brief and seemingly routine. Base Command, Transport 7 reporting arrival at designated position. Cargo secure and personnel accounted for. Awaiting dawn departure orders. The message meant that all the families had successfully crossed into Switzerland and were now under the protection of international authorities. Anna felt tears of relief threatening to spill down her cheeks, but she forced herself to maintain professional composure. Investigator Steinberg spent the night reviewing documents and preparing his report for Berlin. By morning, he would discover enough inconsistencies to expose the entire deception, but by then, it would be too late to reverse what had been accomplished. General Mueller found Anna in the corridor as she prepared to leave for the evening. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw in his expression a mixture of exhaustion, satisfaction, and profound sadness. They both knew that their actions had been discovered and that severe consequences awaited them. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly, using Wilhelm Kellner's name for the second time since their confrontation had begun. "So would yours," Anna replied, recognizing the humanity that military discipline had obscured for so many years. 3 days later, both Anna Kellner and General Heinrich Mueller were arrested and charged with treason against the state. Their trial would become a symbol of resistance within the military, inspiring others to question orders that violated basic human decency. Anna spent 18 months in prison before being released when Allied forces liberated the region. General Mueller was executed by firing squad, but not before writing a letter that would be preserved in military archives for generations to come. "I was saved twice by the Kellner family," he wrote. "Once by a father who pulled me from a battlefield crater, and once by a daughter who pulled me from the crater of my own conscience. Some debts can only be repaid by choosing to be the person that good men believe us capable of becoming." After the war, Anna learned that 47 people had safely reached Switzerland through their intervention, including the young mother and her 4-year-old son whom she had seen from her office window. Many of those families survived the war and built new lives in freedom, carrying with them the story of a secretary who refused to salute and a general who remembered the meaning of honor. Anna never married, dedicating her life to working with war refugees and orphan children. She often spoke about her father's belief that every person possesses the capacity for moral courage, but that it sometimes takes extraordinary circumstances to awaken that sleeping strength. Wilhelm Kellner's words, spoken in a muddy trench during humanity's darkest hour, had traveled across 25 years to echo in his daughter's voice at a moment when they were most needed. The simple act of refusing a salute had rippled outward to save dozens of lives and restore the humanity of a man who had forgotten who he was meant to be. In the end, Anna's story became a testament to the power of individual conscience to triumph over institutional evil, and to the mysterious ways that love and moral courage can transcend death itself to guide the living toward light in their darkest moments.